From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
In 1995, after a 30-year career in 6 countries, he retired to that leisurely life of full-time writing, which we all know is so easy. He writes a regular column on Sunday for the Times of India, and he's also a frequent contributor to the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, and Time magazine. He's here today to talk about his most recent book, which is called The Difficulty of Being Good, on the Subtle Art of Dharma, which asks the question, why be good? This is also a sort of homecoming for Mr. Das, who attended Theodore Roosevelt High School here in Washington, D.C. So, Mr. Das, welcome home.
You do me honor by coming here to listen to me. Someone just called me a management guru, and I didn't get a chance to tell him that my idea of such a guru is somebody who's good at understanding GU, but relatively useless. In my last book, India Unbound, I predicted the economic rise of India. And if I was that sort of person, I would tell you today that I told you so. So prosperity is spreading in India, as it is in China. But happiness is not. India will turn into a middle-class country, like the West or like some of the countries in the Far East. But what is troubling is the fact that we have the most appalling governance. You've been reading about the Commonwealth Games fiasco. Well, that's just one example. And I'm not thinking of a minister who's caught with a bribe. That happens everywhere. I'm thinking of how governance hurts the poor. 1 out of 4 school teachers in a government primary school in India does not show up, and 1 out of 4 who shows up is not teaching. Governance failure, and I could give you many examples like this. Governance failure has 2 dimensions. One is the economic dimension, or the institutional dimension. In other words, if you could punish an absent school teacher, all the school teachers would show up the next day. And school teachers now in India earn 22,000 rupees a month, which is 7 times per capita income of India. So it's a good salary. Most countries, the per capita income relationship is 1:2 instead of 1:7. And that is why I say that if there's a race between India and China, if there is a race, it will be decided by the fact if India fixes its governance first or China fixes its politics first, because both countries are going to become prosperous. They're going to rise economically. But there's a moral dimension. If the school teacher shows up, would that school teacher teach with inspiration, saying that I'm preparing the next generation? And so, to examine the moral dimension, in this book, The Difficulty of Being Good, I go to the epic, the 2,500-year-old epic, the Mahabharata. Now, why this bizarre undertaking? Well, the first thing is the Mahabharata is unique in engaging with the world of politics. Second, the Mahabharata is obsessed with dharma. Now, many of you know in this country karma, but you don't know dharma. Dharma can mean many things. It can mean law, it can mean duty, it can mean virtue, but essentially it means doing the right thing. And so, you know, in a Greek epic, like the Iliad, if Achilles does something wrong to Hector, well, he just gets on with it. In the Mahabharata, the action stops and everybody weighs in as to what went wrong, and the argumentative Indian takes over. The third reason is that in that dharma, nobody asks in the Mahabharata, says, let us ask God for what is dharma. In your tradition, in Christianity, for example, you have the 10 Commandments. And so you have to wrestle with it yourself. And I believe that good moral reasoning is behind good moral action. And finally, the notion of dharma is a pragmatic notion. It does not seek moral perfection. Hence, it is more suited for policymakers and for political leaders. So my book is one man's search for dharma in our contemporary world, and dharma understood both as private virtue but also public or civic virtue. So how do I go about, what's my strategy to connect bad governance with the Mahabharata, with dharma, and try to learn something about the moral dimension of our life? Most of the story of Mahabharata is fairly straightforward. It's a rivalry between two sets of cousins, sets of children of two brothers, and it's a rivalry for the throne. And to contain that rivalry, the kingdom is divided, and the better half goes to the bad guys, and the worst half goes to the good guys. The good guys are called the Pandavas, and the bad guys are called the Kauravas. But the good guys are diligent, hardworking, and talented people, like all of you here. And they clear the forest, they build themselves a beautiful capital. They have a great warrior, Arjuna, on their side, so they expand their dominions. They have diplomatic skills, and so they make alliances, and suddenly they've become the most powerful kingdom in India. And so the eldest brother, Yudhishthir, is told that now you must have a Rajasuya ceremony of consecrating you as emperor. So all the kings and nobles, the surrounding areas, come to this great ceremony, bringing lots of tribute and wealth. Also invited is the eldest brother on the other side, their neighbor, the Kaurava Duryodhana. And when he sees the success of his cousins, he grows envious. And his uncle, who has accompanied him, Shakuni, he says, "My lord, you grow pale and sick." And listen to what Duryodhana says. He says, "What man of mettle will stand to see his rivals prosper and himself decline? What man of metal will see his neighbor prosper? And in this, he has captured the awful nature of envy, something that afflicts us all as human beings and something we never admit and never forgive. You can understand jealousy. Jealousy is that I'm afraid my friend may run away with my wife, and you'll sympathize with me. But envy, just because my friend is doing well, that I should feel bad and diminished. Oh, I pretend. I go and congratulate him, but inside I don't like it. And envy strikes us when we are very young. I remember when I was 5 years old, there was another boy in our neighborhood who had a red toy engine, and I hated him for it. And when he was not looking, I broke it. Terrible. They did a study at Harvard University and asked the graduating class, would you like to earn $100,000 a year or $50,000 a year? Of course, everybody wanted to earn $100,000. But then they put a condition that if you earn $100,000, your friends will be earning $200,000. And if you earn $50,000, then your friends will be earning $25,000. Do you know that 83% of the people switched their answer? And that's why CEOs know that compensation is relative. Anyway, when I grew up, I ran this company, Procter Gamble in Bombay, and our factory was next door to the Philips factory, you know, the Dutch electronics company. And the Philips factory had been on strike for a whole year, and we were worried what was going to happen to us. And one day I heard the union leader of the Philips factory say that I don't care if we ever open this factory again, as long as the Dutch factory manager goes down. This is why I think they're right when they say that if the sin of capitalism is greed, the sin of socialism is envy. And envy affects our lives, our public lives, private lives, in terrible ways. You know, I never understood how in the 1930s, decent middle-class Germans allowed themselves to be swayed by Hitler in this terrible way, and the way what they did to the Jews, until I read that more than 50% of the professionals of Berlin and Vienna were Jews. 64% of the physicians of Vienna were Jews, when the total population of Jews was less than 10%. So those societies were seething with envy. Anyway, let's come back to the Mahabharata. So the uncle says, look, these Pandavas have grown too powerful, and so we can't take them on in a straight contest. And so he says, we will have to use strategy. Now, what does he mean by strategy? He says, I'm the best dice player in the world. And Yudhishthir, the eldest, the king, the good guy, is the worst. But he's addicted to gambling. Plus, he says, you can't lose because I cheat and nobody knows how. And sure enough, there is a gambling match set up, and all the kings and nobles come to this, and Yudhishthir loses everything. He loses his horses, his armies, his kingdom, and then he loses his brothers, then he stakes himself and he loses himself, and finally his wife. And so, to humiliate the good guys, the Pandavas, who've been trapped in this game of dice, the bad guys drag in the queen, Draupadi, who's a beautiful woman, of the Pandavas to humiliate the Pandavas in a patriarchal society. But they don't count on this woman. She is no weeping lady who's going to stand up there to be humiliated. So she asks the question, did my husband lose me first, or did he lose himself first? And immediately the Kauravas sense a trap, because he had lost himself first. And of course, if he had lost himself first, then he was no longer competent to gamble her, because only a free person, he was already a slave, only a free person can gamble anything. Anyway, the bad guys are not going to be deterred by this, so they say strip her, and the younger brother gets up and starts pulling her sari. And as he pulls her sari, the sari keeps expanding infinitely. And after half an hour, he sits down tired and humiliated. And at this point, Draupadi the queen gets very angry, and she looks at this assembly and she says, how did you let this happen? You are kings, and tell me, what is the dharma of the king? And there is silence, and particularly she looks at the elder statesman, the grandfather, Bhishma. But nobody says a word. At which point they are told that when a crime occurs, one half the punishment goes to the person who commits the crime, a quarter of the punishment goes to the ally, but a quarter goes to those who remain silent. Now, we have a very important piece of legislation right now in the Indian Parliament, which is called the Whistleblower Bill, which is to encourage people not to remain silent, to protect them. And let me return back to the Mahabharata. People want to know what actually happened. Why did the miracle take place? And there's a lot of discussion. And one person says that, well, it was dharma. Dharma also means cosmic justice, that she was a good woman, and therefore the miracle of the expanding sari. Now, the Mahabharata is a very popular story in India, and we had recently in the 90s a very hugely popular, the largest ratings on television, serial over 104 weeks of the Mahabharata. And when the Draupadi episode came, a clever Gujarati company marketed a Draupadi collection of saris But those saris unfortunately did not expand infinitely. So the company did not gain much market share. Anyway, now the Pandavas are in the forest. They have been exiled for losing their kingdom, and Draupadi sees her husband sleeping on the hard earth. And she says, "My heart weeps for you, who have always slept on sheets of silk and pillows of down." They had goose down pillows in those days. "And you with 1,000 retainers." And she says, "What kind of world is this? That are the good people destined to suffer, and the bad people who stole our kingdom in a rigged game of dice, destined to live in palaces or mansions in Georgetown or wherever the rich live?" And so she tells her husband, "Look, let's get an army and let's go and win our kingdom back. And your dharma, you are a warrior, a kshatriya, and your dharma is to wage a just war. And our kingdom was stolen from us. So that's a just war." And he says, "No, my dharma is that I've given my word that we will go into exile for 13 years. So you see there's a clash in the Mahabharata of two different meanings of dharma. Dharma as the warrior whose virtue to fight, or dharma as having a more personal virtue, as having given my word. And this clash of dharma is what drives the narrative forward. Anyway, they have a long discussion at this point, and the royal counselor Vidura, who visits them, says dharma is very easy to know. All you have to do is look at the consequences. He's a public figure, so he looks at the consequences, and if an act helps the people, then it's dharma. If it does not, then it's not dharma. And so, but Yudhishthir says that I act because I must, meaning he looks at his own motivations when he acts. And there was, when I was working on this chapter, there was a report in the newspaper about a child who was drowning in the coast of Goa, and a young man jumped in and saved this child. And the reporter from Times of India said, "You're a hero. Why did you do it?" And he said, "Well, we are a college party, and I was trying to impress a girl in our party." And she says, "But then you're not a hero." But Vidura would have said the child was saved. The dharma was done. But you see, Yudhishthir would have jumped in even if nobody was looking. So you see how the Mahabharata helps you to improve your moral reasoning skills. Now, I could go on, and the fact is constantly the Mahabharata makes you look in the mirror, look at the absentee school teachers in the mirror, shows them the mirror, and raises questions of governance and moral failure. It's a dark story. It's a dark story because it leads, the Pandavas come back, the Kauravas don't give them back their kingdom, there's a war. And on the first day of the war, the general of the Pandavas, Arjuna, he looks at all the armies arrayed before him, and he sees his cousins, he sees people he played ball with, he sees his uncles and his grandfather, and he says, I don't want to kill these people, I'm not going to fight. And he tells his charioteer, and his charioteer is the god Krishna. So the god Krishna has to spend the next 700 verses trying to persuade him to fight. But this is a question that Indians keep asking. Who is right, Krishna or Arjuna? Should he fight or not? Now the difference here is that he's not just a general who is not going to fight. You can't just say, well, we invested in sending him to West Point and all that and made him a general. He's also a political leader. And I think what the Mahabharata is saying is that when our political leaders take us to war, we want them to consider the moral dimension also. Now, recently your country went to war in Iraq, and there must have been a meeting of the cabinet, war cabinet, and there must have been Mr. Cheney and Mr. Rumsfeld there, and they must have discussed that night the economic consequences and the political consequences. But I bet you nobody said in that meeting that tomorrow we are going to war, we're going to kill a lot of people. Some of the people we're going to kill are going to die are our own people. Now, they may still go to war, but we want our leaders, before they take us to war, to consider the moral dimension. Anyway, I'm coming to the end, and the Mahabharata is a dark story in which everybody dies, and there's a war, and the winners have to rule over an empty kingdom. But at the end, Yudhishthira is going to heaven, and accompanying him is a dog. And when he reaches heaven, the king of heaven comes out and welcomes him. But instead of going into heaven, he says, what about this dog? And the god Indra, the heaven keeper, says, but he's not even your dog. He's dirty street dog. But besides, this is heaven. No dogs allowed. And then Yudhishthira says, what kind of a place is heaven which does not even understand the ABC of Dharma, that if somebody asks you for refuge, you help them out? And I bet you nobody in this room would have done this. But everybody, every child in every culture will understand the meaning of Dharma from this story. And what the Mahabharata is really saying is that in this darkness, an act of goodness is one of the very few things of value we have. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.